Hey guys, welcome back to my Animal Adventures YouTube channel. And if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know I've really been working with quite a few spider gene ball pythons in my collection here. And actually I'm trying to breed them this year for the first time. And I recently found out that in certain parts of the world, they've actually banned the spider gene from being sold at shows and even being displayed at some of the reptile shows. And that's what I'm going to talk about in this episode. So the spider gene actually came on the scene really early in the ball python craze. The first genes that came out were the albino, followed by the pied, and then almost at the same time the spider gene came out from Kevin McCurley from Nerd, and then the pinstripe from Brian Barczyk from BHB almost at the same time. And they were the first co-dominant genes, and they really, I would say those two genes really fueled the fire for the ball python craze. And when they first came out, they were selling for a ridiculous amount of money, like $25,000 per each individual snake. It was pretty incredible. And now all these years later, the prices come down to where they're really inexpensive. But we've also noticed that there are some defects in the spider gene that's actually genetically passed from one snake to the other, and that is what we call a head wobble. And they have some kind of a neurological defect in the spider gene that's associated just with the spider morph. And in some snakes you can't really see it at all, and some it's pretty severe. And first I want to show you what a spider ball python looks like, and then I'll show you what the head wobble is all about. Alright, so take a look at this ball python. This is a spider female, and she is really impressive. One of the most impressive base morphs that I've ever seen. And I'm pretty sure they call it spider because of the pattern on the back. It's broken up into a spider. This one actually has jungle woma in it, so it's a little bit enhanced, but you really can't tell. I've seen regular spiders, and there's not a whole lot of difference between just a base spider and this particular snake. And on this one, there's actually no head wobble at all. And it almost looks like a perfectly normal ball python. Some of them have a really bad stargaze head wobble, and then they almost can't figure out which direction is up and which direction is down, and they kind of spin their head a little bit. And sometimes I've even seen really extreme cases where they'll actually crawl on their backs upside down, which is pretty crazy. But for the most part, most of the spiders that I've seen are pretty normal. So that is what the spider morph ball python looks like. And I recently found out that in the UK, at the 3 big reptile shows sponsored by the IHS, the International Herpetological Society, they've actually banned the display of the spider ball pythons as well as any ball python combos. You can't display them, and you definitely can't sell them. And in the UK, you can actually sell them on private transactions, but you can't display them or sell them at the reptile shows, which is a really big hit for the reptile community. And if you start thinking about, if we're going to ban the spider, what else are we going to ban? And there's so many genetic anomalies through all the 300 plus different base morph of ball pythons. Some of the champagnes, I've seen champagnes really bad with a really bad head wobble, and there's the hidden gene woma and the sable and the woma and all these other different genes that have some issues with them. And then you start talking about some of the other combinations. For example, for the super lessers, you have bug eyes. Well, are we going to ban all these different mutations that have, the bug eyes, or the lesser pied that has the smaller eyes? And there's just a whole host of different genetic anomalies all through ball pythons that if we start going down the road of banning, especially just one gene, it would be really difficult, especially if you had like a blue-eyed Lucy, where it can have possible other genes and you really don't know if the spider's in there. I'd say it's almost impossible to ban some of those combinations. So here's one of my most impressive snakes. This is a desert ghost pastel spider ball python. And in the UK, you can only dream about actually having this at one of the shows, or actually selling the hatchlings from one of the shows, which is really unfortunate. And this girl has virtually no head wobble at all, no problems at all. And as a matter of fact, out of all my spiders, I only have one that has kind of a more severe head wobble. But you can just see the beauty in some of these animals, and to actually ban them from the shows and to actually try to get rid of these animals, it would be really a shame, because they are so majestic and so beautiful. It would be really a shame to actually lose some of these genes, especially the spider that has really kind of fueled the whole ball python craze. Here's an example of another spider combo. This is just a spider with the pastel, and you can see the pastel really changes the intensity of the color. It just gives it a lot more yellow, kind of brings the yellow down the sides a little bit. And really with these snakes, I haven't had any problems with them feeding or breeding. It's just kind of a weird head wobble on some of them that I don't really find is an issue. Here's another spider combo. This is a spider pied, and actually a lot of the spider pieds have a little color on their head, and this one is called a white wedding because it doesn't have any color on the head. But as you can see with this spider, it doesn't have any issues at all with the head wobble, and it's pretty amazing. I'd say most of my spiders are perfectly fine, and there's only there's only one that I have out of my whole collection that has spider in it that's really got a weird head wobble. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about a head wobble or stargazing in the spider. You can see he can't really get his head upright, and sometimes it bothers people that it has a little bit of a head wobble, or they can't really they can't really tell up from down sometimes. This guy, let me tell you, look at how big and fat he is. He eats and breeds like you wouldn't believe. I'm actually breeding him this year, and hopefully he'll breed okay, but he's been eating just fine. He's a really beautiful, striking snake. And this is also a spider pied. This one just has a little bit of color on the head, and you can see he's actually pretty good. He's doesn't really, if I touch his head to the ground, maybe he'll kind of tilt his head a little bit. You can really tell that he kind of tilts his head a little bit, but it's really not that bad. I've seen some really extreme cases where they can't even get themselves upright, and I'd say that's probably not the norm for spiders. I'd say most spiders are perfectly fine. So here's another white snake. This happens to be a lesser pied, and check out the corkscrewing and the head wobble on this girl. She is almost acting like a spider. So something between the lesser and the pied. I don't know if it's specific to just this one snake, but I'd say this is probably my second, or this might be even the most severe case of a head wobble, and it doesn't even really have spider in it. And she feeds perfectly fine. And as a matter of fact, when I bought this girl on Morph Market, I had no idea it had the head wobble. And that's the other thing that I really don't like about Morph Market, is because you can buy a snake and you really don't know what you're getting as far as the characteristics and any defects. I really like to hold them in person, but really it doesn't really bother me that much that she kind of has that corkscrew. You get her down on a flat ground and she's perfectly fine. She's still a really beautiful snake. And it's the other thing is, if you start thinking about, all right, if we're going to ban lesser pieds because they have the corkscrew, where does that lead us down the road? I mean, are we going to have ball python police picking up every single snake at the reptile show trying to figure out if it has a head wobble? And I would say it's almost an impossible task to try to regulate, some of the defects in these snakes. So here in the United States, we're actually really fortunate that we don't really have the regulations as far as what we can display at the shows and what we can sell. And the sky's the limit here in the United States. The only thing that I've really seen at the shows, when I'm selling at the shows, and some of the regulations that I've seen, is if you're displaying animals and they have diseases such as mites, they'll actually boot you out of the shows, which I think is a good thing, because if someone has mites, I definitely don't want those mites crawling over and infesting my snakes. And other than that, I think the genetic anomalies, it's a really tricky business, and I think it's really controversial. I think you'll find there's a lot of people on both sides of the fence. Some people are for it, some people are against it. And personally, I think the spider gene is one of the ones that's really worth preserving, and not only because it's a really cool looking snake, but because it's really part of the ball python history. It was one of the first genes, one of the first morphs on the market that really kick-started everything, and I definitely don't want to see that gene disappear. So if you really take a good look at the ball python industry, really it's regulated by supply and demand. And I remember when the desert gene first came out, and people thought it was the greatest thing ever, and they were breeding the desert gene through all their collections. And then we found out there was a problem with the females. The females couldn't lay fertile eggs, and a lot of times if you bred the females and they laid eggs, sometimes the females would actually die in the process. And something that became really, really popular, like the desert gene, and then fell out of popularity because of the genetic defects, I think that is really the result of the supply and demand. And really, I think the thing that really keeps the spider from being that popular is some of the genetic defects, and it's really a balancing act between how many snakes you can produce and how many people are willing to purchase those animals, knowing that if they breed them, there's that genetic defect and possibly the head wobble with some of the offspring. And from what I've heard, I haven't actually produced any spider offspring this last year, and I'm actually trying to breed some of my pastel spider desert ghosts, trying to get some more of the pastel desert ghosts. And if I get the spiders, I'm kind of rolling the dice. I've heard that actually it's pretty unpredictable. So if the parents don't have the head wobble, I've heard that actually the offspring have kind of a 50-50 chance of having a head wobble. I'm not sure if it's specific to certain lines, but keep in mind that all the spider genes actually came from one spider mutation that was imported into the country, and every single spider in the whole ball python industry, they're all actually interrelated. Okay, so that wraps up my discussion of the ban of the ball python gene, the spider, at the reptile shows over in the UK. And let me tell you, it's when I heard that, my heart kind of sank, because it's almost like the beginning of the end. Where, I mean, if you ask me for a list of all the genes and the combinations that we should ban because of the genetic defects, I would say it's a pretty long list, and we don't really want to go down the road, because it's really, I think the breeders and the customers should really be aware of the defects. And when you're selling a snake, I think you should inform someone, hey, this is a spider, it has a possibility of a head wobble, and if you don't see it in this snake, you may see it when breeding in the offspring. And I think education is the key. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.